The I See Dead Plants podcast shares the stories of people and plants, pests and pathogens, and the conflicts among them. Join us as we speak to the folks who attempt to solve complex problems with plants through pest management research. I See Dead Plants is an extension-based podcast created by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center. Music written and recorded by fellow plant pathologist Sean Toporek and hosted by Ed Zaworski.
Welcome back to the I See Dead Plants podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ed Zaworski. You're listening to part 2 of my interview with Dr. Tavis Faske, talking southern rust of corn. Thanks for listening. Enjoy, folks. I had another question for you, Travis, that I was just curious about as I was writing up this podcast. We know that there's the IPM pipe program. That's people are tracking rust as it moves, confirming it in counties on a live map. Do you know, are there any people that are doing spore trapping? So like before they even see the development of disease, they say, hey, we've got these little, what'd you call them, furry eggs?
Yeah.
Popping up.
Ornamented eggs.
Ornamented eggs. Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. And
Okay.
I think that just becomes from a time-consuming part, right? And even though we can see rust in the field or you can scout for it, and it's interesting, oftentimes if you're out looking for it, it's not in the middle of the cornfield. You can walk along the side of the cornfield and look at a lot more plants than you could if you're ever walking through corn, right? You're basically trying to cover your eyes when you're walking through corn so you don't get hit in the face. But if you walk along the edge, you're looking at a lot more, and you can usually spot the rust. And at that point, it's not like, oh, go ahead and we're done. We can't treat it. Yes, we can. I mean, that's still at a level that we can treat. So I think there's part of that, Ed, that there are some pathogens out there. I think early warning like that, I'm thinking of like, the downy mildews on onions, can be catastrophic with a small amount, and it's hard to get it under control. But with the southern rust on corn, it's pretty easy. It's really not bad, and our fungicides are still effective on it. There is some different resistance genes, but in general, I would say that there is some variation among hybrids too on how quickly they will develop rust to others. But most of them I would probably just lump into that susceptible category. But some of them are slower to rust and others are much quicker. But still, even the worst ones, the most susceptible, if you're out scouting and you find a plant with rust and it's at the reproductive stages, it's still treatable because you're protecting all that other area of green leafy tissue in the field. You're not going to kill that one pustule or dozen pustules or whatever.
That is the perfect segue. I mean, what ultimately I wanted to talk to Travis about was some research that his lab did on application timings of fungicides for rust. But I feel as though I have had a scatterbrain today. I've been jumping all over the place. So I'm just going to do like a quick recap, as much as for myself as for the audience, and you interject where I get things wrong here. But okay, so we've got this rust pathogen. The spores can move large distances. We don't know what the origin of them is. But we don't think that they're overwintering. Oh, well, especially up here in the north, we don't think they're overwintering around here.
We're sure they wouldn't overwinter there. If it is anywhere, it's in the tropics somewhere, right? Where because these are, they need a living host to survive, and generally that's kind of part of the nature of rust. So it would have to be somewhere in that area. It's just where.
So then it comes to the management choices, right? And so if you're a grower, you're trying to either watch the IPM pipe maps or talk to your local county extension people or your extension plant pathologist and keep an eye on where it might be and what it might be doing, and then making your choices. So yeah, I mean, before we get into application timings of fungicides and what's going on there, I mean, given the nature of this pathogen where it just kind of moves up into the area every year, are there any other ways besides fungicide applications that folks are managing southern rust?
Yeah, and there's one that's actually relatively easy, and that's what I think we do most of the time here. You remember those 6 principles of disease management? There was that one called avoidance. And most of the time we can avoid it because we do know the critical growth stage of when we need to protect the plants from leaf loss. That's going to have the biggest impact on yield. And so if we plant at the right time, especially here in Arkansas, that is before May 1st, usually in March or April, by the time we get to July 1, if that's when rust is going to come in, now we're at a late reproductive growth stage at that point. And so we've avoided it. We've avoided the biggest impact from it at that time. Now, there is corn that's planted late, and we will often tell folks if you're planting corn May 1, budget in a fungicide into your production budget, because if you fast forward then to July 1, now I'm right at VT, and that's going to be at a critical time. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's certainly one of probably the best ways to manage southern rust.
That's perfect. But like you said, if you see it out there and you're wondering what to do, not all is lost, right?
Yeah, no, it's not. And that's sometimes the biggest misnomer about rust. We're talking about it, and we talk about it moving, which is scary, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
and then we talk about it moving very fast, but it's fast in relation to pathology. So, so here's one analogy. I had a consultant contact me one time. He said, I was told that if I don't spray the field, if I find it on Friday and I don't spray it by Saturday, I'll come back Monday and it's going to look like a bomb of Tang went off into my field, right? And for those of us don't remember Tang or don't remember, it's kind of an orange drink, and so it came in a powder form. It looks just like rust spores, right? And it just so that would be really crazy if it moved that fast, and it doesn't. But what I tell guys too is like if you go out and you find a plant that has rust on it, and you come back in 7 days, yeah, there's going to be a few more plants around it that have rust. So, worst case scenario, if you had one plant and you have the spread, now you have something like the size of a car. And then you get the spread, and maybe 7 days later, 14. Now it's the size of a couple of 18 wheelers parked together in the field. Fast forward it, then you get a bigger and bigger spread, but it's not like that super scary scenario where it just is all over in 2 days. Right. You want to be timely with it, but it's not unmanageable at that point.
Mm.
So, and I would tell folks if you were out scouting and you find, some pustules, yeah, within a week you probably need to go ahead and treat if you're at an early reproductive growth stage.
I'll never look at Tang the same way.
Yeah, I find that the older I get, the more, especially the younger the audience, I have to explain what I'm talking about because not everybody remembers Tang.
Yeah, does it still exist? I guess
I
now
don't
I'm going to go to the grocery store and see
and
if I
look
can
for some
find Tang.
Tang. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'll have to look myself. I usually get some lemonade or some other type of flavoring drink for my water, but I don't see the Tang, and I don't see the advertisement anymore. So,
Yeah, the
that-
advertisement, the orangutan always
yeah,
drinking the Tang.
yeah. Now, everybody knows how our pre-recorded conversation went. It usually is some tangent like this.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I'm gonna start. I always say that I need to start hitting record. I'm just gonna, I think next time I have Travis on, which is inevitable, I think I'm just gonna hit record right away, and then I'm just gonna like cut the beginning out and place it in somewhere, because
yeah. I
now,
think that would go good. I would like that. I would like to see where you'd place that somewhere. Like, where's this really oddball discussion on? I don't even remember what we were discussing about, but it was
all kinds
pretty in
of
depth.
things.
Yeah, yeah. We were talking about instructing and teaching, and yeah, we did cover a lot.
Yeah, yeah. There was some good stuff in there. I am sad that I didn't record it, but
Yeah.
Travis, so building off of all of that,
Okay.
you did some research, and I'll have the link to this paper in the show notes as always, along with a bunch of other stuff. But you did some research on application timing for southern rust, and I mean, yeah, if you want to just outline that, but my question based on that paper was going to be just as simple as how does a farmer determine when they should apply a fungicide for southern rust? And I know it's not just a simple black and white answer, but Yeah, go ahead and give us a.
Yeah, sure. So, I always say is, of course, we as pathologists, we're always like, well, we have to have three things to host pathogen environment. So, to make a recommendation to have a farmer think about it, I've got to block one of those. So, I'm going to block the environment. I'm going to say the environment's right for it.
Mm.
What I tell consultants is, if you're waking up, and this happens in Arkansas, it's 75 degrees when you wake up and you walk out in the field and there's enough dew where your pants are wet till noon, and you're getting a rain shower every so many days, or a heavy dew or mist. That's kind of southern rust weather, and that needs to persist for a while. So let's say it's that, and let's say you've got a susceptible host. I already mentioned that they're all susceptible, so those two are given. And if you go out and you scout and you find rust in the field, and it could be just a few pustules, and you're at VT, I would go ahead and treat. If you're at R1, I would go ahead and treat. If you're at R3, I would go ahead and treat. The R4 stage by that point now is a little gray. And if my environment was going to stay or persist longer, I would probably consider treating. If it reversed and was super dry, no rain, wind blowing, but just dried everything out, I probably wouldn't treat. And then by the time you get to the R5 growth stage dent, by the time things get older, especially corn, there's a lot of things that jump on corn. If I found it then, I would certainly walk away from it. We've had folks even years past tell farmers, like, even if you find it at black layer, I know this is crazy, but I'm mentioning now that it was mentioned before that you probably should treat, and that is balderdash. There's no evidence that that's going to do anything. And some of them said for stalk integrity. Well, I think others have done research. If you're going to do anything for stalk, you missed a window by several growth stages. You need
Mm.
to be going back to that VTR1 timing. So that's how I approach it. And then we start talking a little bit about efficacy, which
Hmm.
is which
Hmm.
is where this research kind of helped with, is what would we use? And the Cliff Notes version of the paper is this. We have we have three groups of fungicides, right? We have a frac 11, a 3, and a 7. At the time I did this research, all we had was the 11 and the 3 mostly. And
Gotcha.
and of those two, that 11 is still working on southern rust, and the best one for southern rust. And it actually works preventatively better, than anything else. I'm not even going to go into the curative part for those, but even with the FRAC code 3, the DMIs, they're not providing any curative benefit to this. They would have to be applied early. But the QOIs are still the heavy hitters of this. If we go into any other disease, right, frog eye leaf spot, the cercosporas on soybeans, or even some of the gray leaf spots on corn, we don't see the benefit sometimes from the QOIs if we have resistance developing in that population to that particular fungicide group. But we have not seen that downturn in rust. And that's probably because it is not persisting here, but it's coming in each time. As production practice changes in these other areas where we speculate it's coming from, now that could change what we do in the US. But as far as now, those fungicides are still effective. And there's some Frac 7, the SDHIs. Some of them work really good and some of them don't. There's a lot more variability in those SDHIs when it comes to southern rust. But that still, those are very effective. But like all things, there's limitations to them with the fungicides. Each year there's discussions about, well, I can apply it at this growth stage vegetatively, and I'm going to get protection all the way through. And there's probably people that do that, don't have the conditions for rust, and they're clean all the way through. But I've heard other stories where people applied things early, and then the conditions for rust come in later, and then they are either having to retreat or decide, is it going to be impactful for me or not, because there's a limitation to how long that fungicide is going to protect that plant.
Yeah, this has. I've been thinking up a little wild question here as I like to do in this podcast while you were talking
Uh-oh.
about this. I like to think I work with nematodes a lot, or I've worked with nematodes a lot in the diagnostic clinic. And I think a lot about the fact that, especially in corn or cotton or peanuts or whatever we're talking about, other than soybeans, pretty much, there's more than one nematode that can be a factor. And where I'm going with this is, do you recommend anything differently if there are multiple diseases involved? Like, let's say you have a ton of gray leaf spot as well as southern rust. Does that would that alter your recommendations to a grower, like as far as managing southern rust, or do they kind of sync up in a way?
No. You're right, and thanks for kind of catching that part for me over selling maybe the QOIs or the FRAC 11 only. I would. Well, most now there's premixes for everything. I don't know if there's much solo product, so they're probably going to go out with something that's a premix material. And although those are both effective, the QOI is the stronger one of the two. Okay, but if there are something else like gray leaf spot issues, yes, I think that my focus would change to say, you don't need to just rely on that one chemistry. You may need to identify where another chemistry where has better efficacy, and on the CPN they have a great efficacy table, and then you could kind of pick things like this one's good or fair for southern rust, and also have issues with gray leaf spot. I'm going to pick something that's good and fair with that too, where they match up, where you're probably looking at more of a premium material, a premium product that may have 2 or 3 effective components than just the one. But the research, we do things for research purposes, and just to tease out which is doing the most. And that was kind of the Cliff Notes version for that research. That's what it showed. But you're right. That's probably not what we would continue to recommend, even in the future, as that goes.
Oh yeah, and I guess that
Yep.
wasn't my aim was to I was just thinking kind of philosophically, like I guess I'm always trying to think about things rather than, because it's rarely black and white, right? Like,
Yeah.
if
Yep.
there's southern rust, there's just going to be southern rust, and let's focus on that. But I was just curious more than anything, and that's it.
Yeah.
But it brought up a great point. Like I've been working on this thing for CPN with an IT guy. The fungicide efficacy guides, I'm working on converting them into like a searchable tool where you could click drop boxes.
Cool.
And,
Yeah.
Say, hey, I have corn and I have this disease, show me the fungicides that are effective or not effective, and all their
Absolutely.
rankings. So.
And I guess I should preface some of that too is my references for the Arkansas farmer, or sometimes even the Mid-South, where the number one most important issue we see on corn is southern rust. There's some areas that do have a little northern corn leaf blight, but it's really not that common. Gray leaf spot is probably an issue if they put too much nitrogen on the plants and it stays greener longer, and so you could certainly get some there. But typically year in and year out, the southern corn rust is our main issue. And so really, it's kind of nice, some of my trials from an efficacy standpoint, I can block everything else out and just see what things are doing for southern rust.
No, that's another really important too, is like everybody needs to know in their area what's the highest trump card, right?
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah. What's going to have the greatest impact at the end of the season? I guess it's kind of like know your diseases, right? What's going to be important, and those others are certainly important in probably isolated areas. But you're talking about with southern rust, it's so widespread and it affects so many more farmers, areas, states, usually in one season than some of those other diseases combined over years.
Are you wondering which fungicides to use for a particular corn, soybean, or wheat problem? Check out the Crop Protection Network Fungicide Efficacy Guides. These guides can help you identify the best fungicides for the disease you are battling.
I think, I've gotten down my outline where I'm getting into wrap-up questions, but I always like to stop here and ask, is there anything we missed about Southern Rust that we didn't talk about in either our pre-podcast or our actually recorded podcast here?
No, I think we covered most of everything. I'm trying to, I, I guess you certainly want to emphasize that it's not following that consistent timeline each year, right? And that's why the map and monitoring is because it is inconsistent. And so knowing what growth stage you're at, how much rust I have is going to it's going to vary every year, even in my fungicide trials. And I'm trying
Mhm.
to focus where I get the right growth stage at July 1. And, I'm only right. Oh, I'm less than 50% of the time, that I'm getting that environment and everything else. So it is something worth going out and searching for. It's actually pretty easy to spot. I will say though, the one last thing I would say is usually early on detection is really tough, right?
Mm.
Finding that one pustule on that one leaf in that one field is really rare. And unless you're out there all the time, you're probably not going to see it. And the last thing from a diagnostic point that I would say,
Mm.
and I've seen this happen, is folks will take common rust and it'll be a little bit higher in the canopy, and they'll think, okay, we have got southern rust. I need to go by Travis and show him and have him look at this under the scope. And they'll bring it into the lab and then they'll hold it up into the fluorescent lights and look at it and say, oh man, this is common rust. And because there's something about that intense sunlight when you're out in the field, not saying you're getting lightheaded, but just the colors of the spores on common rust tend to be lighter sometimes.
Mm.
But it's always worth checking, and I'm happy to do that. But for us, we wouldn't treat for common rust. We would treat for southern rust. And knowing the difference between those two is certainly important. The characteristics of that common rust is brick red, usually lower in the canopy, likes cool temperatures, really stops developing in July and August.
Mm-hmm.
Southern rust, orange, mid canopy, upper canopy, likes it hot, tends to increase more in July and August. And then its spacing, it tends to spread out on a leaf in a more dramatic fashion, kind of like almost like a bomb going off, and then your spores pour over that, where common rust tends to be a little bit more linear, just kind of following the veins of the plant early on. So those all put together, picking one diagnostic feature like color is not enough. Shape, not enough by itself, but you start adding all these together, it makes it a little easy. And I'll say I've been fooled in the field too, and I've had to bring it back into the lab. So it happens to even the best of us.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Obviously, I'm a little biased working in diagnostics for so long. No,
Yeah.
but I I've had some people give me a little bit of grief over the years being a diagnostician. I have tended to be a little bit hesitant to do, like, at any time I go to an event, even still now, I go to give an extension talk and people want to show me pictures on their phone or show me a sample and ask me what it is on the spot. And it's funny. I've always been super cautious about it for that reason that you said. I mean, I've got countless stories where, people are just, they're wrong about something. And the only way that you would have known is take it to the microscope or even take it to the, extract some DNA and look at it that way. But yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. That is such an important point about, like you said, you wouldn't recommend that somebody treat for common rust.
Right.
And if you just are out there kind of arbitrarily looking, you could get them confused.
Oh, absolutely. And then you're back to treating twice, and with the economics on corn, probably harder to pencil out. It's always the most important thing of any disease management, right? Make sure you got the critter that you're trying to control.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
But like I said, I am biased.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think we have hammered the important stuff on Southern Rust, and I don't probably say this enough, but if you have follow-up questions or if you're curious more about Southern Rust, reach out to us an email, and we can
Absolutely.
either put you, and Travis's link to his website profile will be in the show notes. So you reach out to him, reach out to me, whatever you like. But with that, I suppose we'll get into wrap up.
All right.
What do you
Okay.
think?
Yeah. I can't think of anything else that we would benefit from adding right
So
now. So we're good.
So I think we've probably answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway because it's a good rehash. What would you say is the most important consideration for growers with regards to managing Southern Rust?
Yeah, I would say the most important part is first that identification, right? That make sure you've got the right critter that you're trying to control, and then find the right person or the help as far as, if the conditions are right and you're going to treat, make sure you put the right fungicide on at the right timing. Too early, it's not going to be effective. Too late, you run the risk. And I guess, don't let those, the maps that we have just be super scary, right? That just
Mm.
means that one county, one plant, when it's highlighted, it could be just one plant. It doesn't mean that it was the whole county. And each scenario is a little different. It's hard to have a blanket discussion with that, but that would be the most important thing to keep in mind.
Another one that I had that I don't know that we hit on this at all, but are there any concerns with regards to Southern Rust? And we're seeing fungicide resistance in quite a few pathogens, a lot of them on soybeans. Are we seeing any resistance in Southern Rust? And I guess secondarily to that, are we concerned about that happening over time?
Yeah, it's interesting because the QOIs are still working, and we would expect if anything was probably to drop off, it would be those. So I think the threat's low because you have all these spores that are developing and coming in. If we were in an area where we had a green bridge where we had corn and then corn again, and we were treating all the time, and we were kind of sharing those spores with each other in a same environment, yeah, I think that would be the area where you would have a higher risk. I think right now what we see is just the difference with like the frat code 3 or the DMIs really is efficacy, right? It's just really not as effective on the southern rust as what those strobilurin and fungicides are. So with the other chemistries coming in, there's probably less of a risk, and it seems like everything now is almost like a two-way or a three-way mix. If it would happen, it's probably going to be in some of these other pathogens that I always call sometimes trash fungi, right?
Mm,
That are in the residue at the end of the season, and then those are the initial inoculum for the subsequent season. I'll take a stand on that and say I'm not as worried about that as I am in other systems.
sure.
Yeah.
No, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. And then I just remembered something based on you saying that. So I'm gonna try and tie it into this last question, maybe. So my last question is always, if you were talking to the general public about Southern Rust and the work that you do with it, what would you tell them about its importance to them? But I'm going to try and tie it in with something that we said in our podcast, where Travis was talking about a epidemic of Southern Rust back in the 70s.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So maybe just really quick, if I mean, like, I think you had mentioned like you'd have to do some touch up reading about exactly what year that happened or anything, but I think it's relevant to if you were talking to somebody about the general public about Southern Rust, right? Because this is like a forward facing example of when it was a big deal and pretty bad, right?
It is an interesting story. And so, if you're talking to the general public, a lot of times things that are economic are important, right? Availability of, a lot of the corn is going into the grain for food. And as the grain prices are high, our food costs are certainly higher. One of the times that where corn suffered, production suffered in the US was the epidemic that we all learn in plant pathology is the southern corn leaf blight epidemic of the 70s, right? The T toxin and the Texas mel sterile germplasm and all that kind of good stuff. We eat it up. And then it kind of stops. But that part is kind of a selling point to the public. Like, look, all the corn was pretty much lost. Now we don't have a replacement for it. Corn prices are skyrocketing high. But if you look at the literature, one of the things to me that was really interesting is one of the first epidemics we talk about for southern rust in the United States was in Mississippi. And it followed that southern corn leaf blight epidemic of the US. So in the US, all the corn is affected. But here, the farmers in Mississippi identified that now with some of maybe the newer germplasm that didn't have the southern corn leaf blight, that they could maybe get a double crop in of corn. So plant the first crop really early and then plant the second one late. And that's the first time we talk about is significant yield losses by southern rust in the U.S. was in Mississippi during a couple of years there where they were trying to double crop, right? They were trying to probably had good prices, maybe a little bit better genetics and thinking, I'm going to get ahead. And then here something else comes up and is a problem. But it's interesting how those two are actually joined at the hip, but we just talk about one or the other. But that's kind of interesting how that dynamic economically kind of brought those together. And it's a really interesting read from the Mississippi part. So very cool stuff, I think.
I think it's a great it would be a great point to make to somebody of the public, right? Like if you're sitting down at the Thanksgiving dinner table with a relative or something and you're explaining the work that you do, like, I don't know, I think that's a great point because just to convey to somebody how complicated agriculture is. Like I say it all the time on here, and you probably say it all the time to people. I mean, like, it's complicated, and the choices that you make have, sometimes positive benefits and sometimes negatives, and that was one of them where I was like, oh yeah, look at it, we can do this. This is be great, and
Yeah, and then from I guess from a job security part, right? That no matter what, no matter how far we advance genetics or a resistance to herbicides or tolerance to herbicides in those, at some point there's some pathogen that is historically come up to be a problem. And even in my career, I can see that, every 5 or 6 years, my direction shifts a little bit because maybe our production systems change, maybe the need changes and we have more of one crop or the other, but then that other pathogen becomes more important, that other disease comes up. And we could talk about target spot being an issue for us in 2016 and other things. And it's kind of reactive for those of us in extension, but I don't know how many times that somebody will say, well, how did this happen and why? And and we've never had to worry about this disease until that year. So I can imagine that those pathologists in Mississippi and other areas were like, now you've created this different environment. It's a whole nother opportunity for research, and they're probably playing catch up like I am playing catch up today on some of the pathogens that we really thought were minor and under the right system are a major issue. So job security, but a fun job, I will say. Always interesting.
yeah, what's the I always butcher this quote, but it's like it's something along the lines of, I think the first time I heard it was talking with Marty Draper about wheat stem rust. Was
Hmm.
it goes something like, the best ally of a, and I don't remember who said it either, but the best ally of a plant pathogen is our own short-term memory, right? Like,
Yeah,
you said it, like, I mean, oh, this pathogen wasn't a problem before, what's going on now? Well,
yeah.
something changed. We did something that, nobody thought it was going to be a negative thing for the situation, but here it is rearing its ugly head now, and got to flip the switch and deal with that now.
Exactly. And when you plant millions of acres of something, it's easier to see that boo-boo, if you will,
Hmm.
than when you just have a few thousand acres or maybe in a smaller area. But yeah, it's always changing. Certainly, like I said, job security for plant pathologists.
But yeah, if you are a member of the public listening to this, which I really hope that you are, I mean, that's an important thing to know about all this.
Mhm.
Staying vigilant and keeping up on things and being ready for when changes happen,
Yeah.
what the next big thing might be. So
Yeah. And some years, there's scientists doing great work, but it's sometimes on something that is not important. It's not newsworthy. It's not in the newspaper at that time. But just wait till something shifts, and then that person is so invaluable for the research they're doing, and we're so happy that they continue to do that. Even sometimes, I shouldn't get into the funding agencies, but sometimes they get complacent, like, oh, well, this is not important anymore. Is it not? You know, how can you say that? You can't. You don't have a good crystal ball, because I don't, and I
yeah,
try to buy the best. So.
yeah. The best eBay crystal. No.
Yeah. Available at the end of this podcast.
Oh
Uh,
man. Well, Travis and the audience, you've endured my scatterbrainedness and random questions today. So now's your time. Make any acknowledgments you want to make, point people to any resources you want to point them to. You've got the floor, Travis.
Okay, well, I would certainly acknowledge, we're lucky in Arkansas to have a great support by our corn farmers. The research that we were just talking about was sponsored by them. We're lucky to have them. Glad to be here in Arkansas working for them, and as well as being able to the freedom to be able to look at different research and working with the University of Arkansas system has really been fun for the last 12 years, and I look forward to the future in whatever I may be researching. And I guess the last shout out to all my colleagues in plant pathology who are really just close friends, and some of you even get a chance to go to boundary waters with, like Ed, to go fishing, which is I know the highlight of my last this past year. And it wasn't just a walleye; it was always some of the friendships you make along the way too.
That's absolutely true. I'd recommend it to anybody. And, hey, if you're out there and you want to go, twist my arm.
It won't take much.
No. So, with that, thank you so much, Travis.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks, for tuning in, and keep listening. And we'll see you next time, as always. Thanks.
I See Dead Plants bridges the gap between plant science research and the impact it has on our daily lives. It is brought to you by the Crop Protection Network and the North Central Integrated Pest Management Center, which are both partially supported by the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture. For more information on today's topic or other pest management issues, check out our show notes, cropprotectionnetwork.org or ncipmc.org. Remember, this information is for entertainment purposes only. The statements made in this podcast should be interpreted within the limited context of the particular topics being discussed. Contact your state extension program for local information on pest management. For the full non-discrimination statement or for accommodation inquiries, go to cropprotectionnetwork.org/about. Thank you for listening to I See Dead Plants.